A very good morning to everyone. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So today we'll start the day with the personalities of the day. So we'll be talking about a Dr. Vishal Rao and an artist who makes toys, and his name is Kausar. So these toys are made in Channapatna, and if you know, the Channapatna toys have a GI tag, so it is a very popular toy making center in Channapatna. So what happened was that after patients who have throat cancer undergo operation, they will have to be inserted a prosthesis so that they are able to speak after their larynx is removed. But this operation and the insertion of the prosthesis usually cost nearly 15,000 to 30,000 rupees. So this was not a cost-effective method for the poor to who undergo this operation. So they were facing a lot of difficulty. So Dr. Vishal Rao, he designed a special type of silicon-based prosthesis which was within rupees 50. So with this, the cost of the operation came down to a large extent from 15,000 to 30,000 to somewhere around just rupees 50. So this shows how a doctor can contribute so much to the through his innovative approaches. But after doing this also, the doctor faced a problem that in placing that prosthesis to the throat, the patient had to be taken to the operation theater. But many people feel very nervous to go to an operation theater, and the Dr. Vishal Rao wanted a way out of this. So he approached this toy maker in Channapatna and he asked him to make a cylinder, a tube, and a piston with the help of which this prosthesis could be pushed to the right place in the throat without going to the operation theater. So this precisely what the artist at Channapatna has developed. So with this, the prosthesis could be placed in the throat in less than 2 minutes, and there is no need to go to the operation theater also, and the cost is also reduced to a large extent. So first of all, this whole story highlights so many things, how it is possible to find very innovative yet simple solutions to some of the complex problems. The second thing it shows is that these innovative steps can also help in the revival and even the survival of traditional art and the local artists. We always talk of reviving our traditional arts, supporting our local artists. So when art can combine with science like this, then there is nothing like that. So this is a very classic example of combining art and science and how it can lead to survival of the local artists also. The third important thing that this highlights is it highlights the problem solving attitude of an individual with the help of just locally available resources. And fourth, it highlights how eco-friendly and pocket-friendly solutions can be found. And for this, one only thing that one needs is a quality of empathy and compassion for the poor people. Then nothing can stop that person to find out innovative solutions to complex problems. So with this, we will start with the center-state relations. Before that, I think this topic of the story of Vishal Rao and Kausar, I took from somebody in the comment who had suggested this. So you can everybody can pull up your own stories, whatever you have read and whatever you are aware of. So you can just put it in the comment section. Maybe I'll also take them up every day so that it will save my effort also. At the same time, you can all pull things together, and that can work really well. So that is one thing. So now we will start with the first topic of the day. It is about the center-state relations. Even if you start looking from the independence onwards, there have been several instances wherein the government at the center and the government at the states are different. And that time, the government at the center will try to displace the government at the states because if it belongs to a different political party. So the governments at the center, if it is a different ruling party, then it will try to dislodge the state government which is ruled by a different political party. So these instances have led to a lot of hindrances in the center-state relations in smoothly developing those relations. So this tendency was also observed by commissions like the Sarkaria Commission and the Panchi Commission, and they have told that this tendency must stop. So what is a recent issue in this regard is related to Rajasthan. So in Rajasthan, the ruling party has accused the opposition party that the opposition party is trying to unsettle the government in Rajasthan. So it is doing so by engineering defections. So how does it engineer defections? Either by luring people who belong to the ruling party to join the opposition or by threatening them. So, by these, the opposition party is trying to engineer defections in the ruling party and is trying to create political instability in the state, and it's trying to make the government in Rajasthan fall down. So, this is the allegation that the ruling party has leveled against the opposition party. Now, in this regard, if you look at various past instances also, in the past in Karnataka or in the Madhya Pradesh, the similar pattern has been observed where the MLAs who belong to the ruling party have defected and they have joined the opposition, and later on the opposition has gone and become the ruling power in the state. So this was observed in Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh. Even before that, in Goa and Manipur also, how the current ruling dispensation, how it got the power, was also very through questionable means. So this is another issue. If you look at Madhya Pradesh in the recent times, during the period of COVID itself, how the Kamalnath government in the Madhya Pradesh was brought down during the COVID pandemic. And today that there are so many COVID cases in Madhya Pradesh, and more than that, the death rate is high in Madhya Pradesh, is said to be one of because one of the main reasons is because of political instability that all these gave rise to. So the government gives their leadership at the state level. So when the government falls down, so it leads to a political instability and thereby a chaos in the state. So because of this, the death rate and COVID related deaths have been high in Madhya Pradesh is one of the strong arguments. This. So in this instance, it is very important that what is important at the end of the day is the constitutional principles. So under constitutional principles, we have participatory a parliamentary democracy. So in a parliamentary democracy, it is the people who elect their leaders. So for instance, in a particular state, say Rajasthan, people have elected a party which has come to power, but because of these engineered defections, a different party comes to power. So this is completely against the mandate of the people. So this goes against the principle of parliamentary democracy, which is a basic feature of our constitution. So therefore, it is important that the constitutional principles are not violated and the mandate of the people is not disrespected. So also political instability has its own ripple effects that it can cause in the state economy. So because of that, all of these things should not be done. Now we'll move to the next topic, which is massive open online courses. So even before we had read about, we had in detail discussed a question, what is what the pros and cons of online education we had already discussed. Even MOOCs are very similar to that. So these are open online courses where the course is open to anybody who wants to subscribe for it. Many of these courses are free and many of them are also paid courses. So now why we'll be talking about this is because recently the University Grants Commission has directed various universities that they should encourage the massive open online courses for their various colleges. Now why has this been done? One reason for this is the COVID crisis. So because of the COVID crisis, these colleges and students going to the colleges is not going to happen anytime soon. So therefore, if the courses will have to continue, then it'll be very important to put them as massive open online courses so that students can take these courses and complete their degrees. The second important reason why MOOCs become very important is India has its own targets when it comes to what all it has to achieve in the higher education sector. For instance, there is a gross enrollment ratio. So India wanted to achieve a gross enrollment ratio of 30% by 2021. But if you go by the 17-18 data, this gross enrollment ratio was just 25.8%. So if because of the COVID crisis, people, the students don't enroll themselves for higher education, if there is a fall in this, then we will be going even further below than this, and we will never be able to reach our target of 30% GER by 2021. So in order to ensure that we reach our gross enrollment ratio also, it is very important that we promote massive open online courses. So these are two very important reasons why the government is now pressing for MOOCs. But however, there are several issues with MOOCs. The first thing is that in the case of MOOC, it is a teacher to student teaching. So this is more top down in nature, where the teacher teaches and the student learns. So it is more unidirectional, where the teacher thinks that he has the knowledge and he has to impart it to the students, and students are considered to be empty vessels and they needed to be filled with information and knowledge. So this is more top down in nature. But what happens in a classroom, in a physical classroom, there will be more interactions, more discussions, and more questions from the side of the students. So, which makes the whole session more interactive and not just top down. So, in the top down approach, the students are considered to be sponges who just absorb what the teacher is telling. But in a physical classroom, there is a learning on both the sides. Even the teacher learns from the student and the students learn from the teacher. There is exchange of ideas and there is a cross fertilization of ideas. So this doesn't happen in the case of a MOOC, but it rather happens in the case of a physical classroom. Second is regarding the role of the teacher. So the role of teacher is usually to act as an intellectual midwife. An intellectual midwife means that the teacher will have to give directions to the students on what direction they have to think. So they will just be facilitators, with the help of whom the students will develop their own ideas, their own critical thinking abilities, and their own imaginative abilities. So these are very important, and the teacher plays the role of an intellectual midwife. But in the case of MOOCs, the teacher cannot play the role of an intellectual midwife, but the teacher would rather just pass on his own ideas and his own creative thoughts to the students, but it will not let the students develop their own creative thinking abilities. So this is the another issue with the MOOCs. The third issue is that these online classes are possible for mainly those subjects which can theoretically be explained. But several subjects like engineering, medicine, pharmacy, architecture, agriculture, physiotherapy, they all require some practical work which may be done in a laboratory. So all of these things cannot be studied under with the help of a MOOC. They would rather require a physical classroom where these things are taught to them and they are shown to them. So they are more practiced in a way. So the demonstration of various concepts in these subjects is very important, and that cannot be done in an online setting. It can only be done in a laboratory in the form of a practical work. So first of all, MOOCs will not be applicable to these courses which are more practical oriented. So that is a limitation with respect to the applicability of MOOC. But if you look at that way, there are several humanities courses which are considered to be theory oriented and they are considered to be good courses for MOOCs. But however, when you say that is practical work and experiments in the laboratory, in that case, even a classroom itself is a kind of a laboratory where there is testing of ideas, where there is testing of opinions and interpretations. So even a classroom itself becomes a laboratory where the ideas are experimented with. So in that way, even the theoretical subjects, it is not possible to be taught in a physical classroom because such experimentation with the ideas will not be possible through an MOOC. So this is another thing with respect to the practical part of the subjects. And then is that if you talk about a classroom is a setting where people interact with each other. They face discrimination and then they also learn how to stand against the discrimination. They face stage fear and then they also learn how to overcome the stage fear. So all of these things will not be possible in the case of an MOOC where the interactions among the students will be bare minimum. As we already know that it is a top-down model and the interaction between the students will not be that much. So this is another thing which is the issue with respect to the MOOCs. Yes, there are various good things also. For instance, the people with who are differently abled, so they will be who may face difficulties in going to the college. It may be a blessing for them that they are able to sitting at their homes, they are able to learn and they are able to gather knowledge. So, but however, it cannot completely replace the physical form of education in the classroom setting. So therefore the two will have to be more complementary and, to each other, but not one replacing the other. So this is the whole gist of this. Now we'll move to the next topic, which is the NIRF ranking, that is National Institutional Ranking Framework. So this ranking framework is given by the Union Ministry of HRD. So the recent update is that the QS rankings, higher education rankings have come. So in this rankings, all of India's higher educational institutes have dropped in their rankings compared to the previous years. All the IITs, ISC, every institute has dropped in this higher education rankings. So in the previous lecture also, we saw a few issues related to these rankings. So one of the important things why we are ranked low is because the higher education rankings, they give a lot of importance to the internationalization aspect. That means how many international faculties are teaching in a particular college, how many international students are studying in a particular college. All of these things are given a lot of weightage, but that is low in India. So this is one hindrance why Indian institutions are ranked low in this particular ranking. But there are several other issues as well. So the one issue is definitely the internationalization that we already saw. The second issue is respect to the perception. So if you look at these international rankings, the QS higher education rankings, they have various parameters on which the higher education institutions are ranked. So one of these parameters is the perception. That is, what is the perception about a college or a university in the eyes of the students, in the eyes of the employers who are going to take students through placements, in the eyes of the general stakeholders. So what is a perception about an institution? But perception, is a very subjective matter. So what is good to me could just be average for you. So this subjective thing is definitely there with perception, and India ranks very low in when it comes to perception. And India also feels that this perception is a very subjective thing, and the parameters that are used for ranking these educational institutions at the international level will have to be more objective and concrete, and they must not be so subjective. So, in response to this, India has developed its own national institutional ranking framework that was developed by the HRD Ministry in the year 2016. So, this includes various parameters like teaching and learning, then what is the student strength, what is the faculty strength, that is also there, and how many research papers and how many patents are being published in a particular college, and what is the graduation outcomes. So graduation outcomes means how many of the graduates get eventually placed in good companies. That is the graduation outcomes. All of this. So apart from these parameters, there are several unique parameters which are very specific to the Indian setting. So because we follow this inclusive educational approach where even all the backward communities, where even the backward regions will have to be given more representation in the educational institutions, so as to ensure that the education as a service provided is more inclusive of the society. So these unique kinds of parameters which are specific to India are also included. For example, judging the institutions based on their inclusivity and their inclusivity and outreach to various backward sections of the population, including the gender, what is the male-female ratio in the colleges and universities, what is the socio-economic diversity that is present in the college, how many people from the differently abled are present in the college. So all of these inclusivity and outreach parameters are also included in the NIRF framework. So this makes it more India specific and more relevant to the Indian setting. So this is very important. Now go to the next topic, which is application of robotics. So in the past videos also we have seen several examples of robots, and we have discussed a question in detail, what is robotics and what are its applications in various fields. That also has been discussed. So this is yet another example where a robot called as Captain Arjun is being used in the Pune railway station. So what Arjun does is he will screen the passengers and survey the passengers, and he will ask questions even in the local languages, and it allows for a two-way communication. So basically it eventually helps out in saving the staff and other passengers from the spreading of the infections. If a particular person has infection, then the others, staff and the passengers, will be saved from having this infection. So everybody is going to be screened by Captain Arjun. So this Arjun is equipped with artificial intelligence to track the suspicious activity or suspicious antisocial activity. Then it has a processor, it has an inbuilt storage and all that. So it is also having the thermal sensor which is going to measure the temperature of the person. So all of this AI capabilities are also there in Arjun. So this is going to help in separating the infected person or a suspected to be infected person from the rest. Thereby it prevents the spreading of the infection. So this is about the application. This is an example that you can use in the field of robotics. So next is the telecom sector issue. So the recent update has been, so basically you have to understand first what is the issue. There are several telecom companies like there is Vodafone, there is Bharti, there are so many companies, Reliance, so many telecom companies are there. They are supposed to pay to the Department of Telecom two types of revenues. One is the revenue that is generated from the telecom operations, and the other that is generated from the non-telecom operations. So from the telecom operation, when these two are combined, it is called as adjusted gross revenue. So these telecom companies are supposed to pay a revenue that should be accumulation of their telecom revenues and from their non-telecom operations. Non-telecom operations means what? Maybe they are getting some interest out of something, out of the loan that they have given, or they have a property which they have rented it out, so they are getting a rental income. So these are no way related to their telecom operations, but Department of Telecom says that they will have to pay this aggregated gross revenue to the Department of Telecom, and the aggregated gross revenue should not only include the revenue from telecom operations, but it should also include the revenue from non-telecom operations. So this has been the position of the Department of Telecom and the government. But the issue has been that if this is done, then you look at the financial status of these telecom firms in India. So they are in a very bad financial status. Even when the spectrum auctions are held, not many of these telecom industries are participating in the auction because they don't have that financial wherewithal with them now. As of now, they are running huge debts which they have to pay back, and because of the huge debts, they are even undergoing mergers among themselves, so that this will help their balance sheets to grow, and they will be in a better position to pay back their debts and better position to consolidate their revenues. So because of which even mergers are going on in this field. So this shows the bad financial health in which these telecom companies are. But what the government wants is the revenues. So because it's of the short-term perspective that the government want revenues, the telecom companies are suffering. So they are being demanded more revenue by the government, which they are unable to pay. So in this case, it is said that one is a short-term consideration of the government with respect to the revenue, and another is a long-term implication that it has on these telecom companies on their finances. So therefore, the government should take a longer term perspective and help these telecom companies who are now undergoing a lot of, who are in a lot of financial stress. Because if these telecom companies fail, so it will have ripple effects in the economy. It will not just affect these telecom companies. It will not just affect the consumers or the customers who have this network, but it is also going to affect the financial sector, the banks from which these telecom companies have taken the loans. Even these banks will suffer because these companies will not be able to pay back their loans. So it will again lead to mounting of the non-performing assets in the banking sector. So it is going to have ripple effect on the economy if the telecom companies are being forced to pay the AGRs when they are in a poor financial health. So in this regard, the government should take a longer term perspective. So you can have a question like analyze the issues that the telecom industry in India is facing. So in that case, this is one of the important issues that the telecom industry is facing, and you can explain that. So, and this whole article was about a Supreme Court judgment in that came recently, wherein it said that the non-telecom companies, the non-telecom PSUs, so like for example, GAIL, Oil India, Power Grid, so these are non-telecom PSUs. So the court has said that these non-telecom PSUs should not be forced to pay their dues related to AGR as of now. So that is what the Supreme Court has said. So even in this particular judgment, the telecom PSUs are not getting any benefit out of this judgment. So this is one issue that the telecom companies are facing, and you can cite them when any question on the telecom sector happens. So next is about the disasters. So disasters, this is about an oil field in Bagjan, Assam, which is under fire now. So this oil field, that is the Bagjan oil field, was operated by the Oil India Limited, which is a PSU. So this particular oil field in Assam has caught fire, and even now the effects of that has not been curbed. So in the news, so let us analyze the issues with respect to this. The first thing is that as this oil field was operated by Oil India Limited, which is a PSU. So this particular PSU has been operating in this, and it has a vast experience and expertise in operating the gas and oil fields in Assam from a last so many years. But even then, it did not have a safety protocol or what has to be done in times when the oil field is catching fire. So it did not have a disaster management plan for all these things. So that is one failure with respect to the safety protocols are not followed, and there is no plan what has to be done whenever a disaster strikes. The second thing is, even after the disaster has struck, Oil India has not been able to contain this disaster. It has not been able to contain the fire. So the fire has not been blown out even now, and a team from Singapore was in fact called to blow out the fire. So it took some time for the team from Singapore also to make sure that things are under control. So this shows that in the first place there is lack of expertise itself in to handle whenever these disasters occurs, how to contain them. That expertise also not there with the oil PSUs. So this speaks a lot about the condition of the PSUs in the country, and it also speaks volumes about the importance that disaster management is getting in the country. So these are the two implications from this. The second is the next thing is that this gas leak has caused an extensive devastation in the Dibru-Sakhova National Park in Assam, and also a nearby wetland. So this shows how these disasters are actually causing the devastation of the wildlife and the environment in the nearby areas. So this again shows a disregard towards the environmental protection and the safeguards that are required to be adopted to safeguard our environment. So this is another important issue that this has given rise to, that how important is the wildlife and environment for us. So there has always been this disregard where there are no safety protocols to be adopted to safeguard the animals and the ecosystem and the environment from such devastation. So this is another issue that comes out of this disaster. So this can be cited as an example whenever there is any question on disaster. So next we'll be discussing about yesterday's or Friday's question. The question I had asked was, what is the role that is played by the GM crops or genetically modified crops in food security in India? So first of all, you can give introduction in two ways. So one, you can say you can give a small definition of the GM crops, that where the genes are modified for some desirable qualities like resistant to more temperature, salinity, stress, etc., and that is genetically modified. And apart from that, another way of introduction could be to tell the importance of genetically modified seeds in the current scenario. Or crops in the current scenario. For instance, there is a lot, the climate change is going on, there is increasing temperature, global temperatures are rising, the increasing instances of floods and droughts, and increasing pest instances like the current locust issue. So all of these things have directly they are going to threaten the food security. So it is here where the genetically modified crops can play their important role in safeguarding the food security. So you can either start by defining, or you can start with importance, or you can just combine the two, give one line definition and state the importance of GM crops. That could be your introduction. So now in the body, as it is a 10-marker question, you are directly going to hit the question with how it is going to help the food security. So one is it is going to help, and next it is not going to help. So even though it is not asked, you have to write that it is not going to help also, because you have to be, that is the fact also, that GM crops are not going to completely remove food security from India. So that you have to show the examiner that you know that fact. So first is how it is going to help deal with the food security in India. The first thing is that Just you have to write short points only, not keep on explaining everything. So first it will increase in it can give you higher yields of the crops. Then there can be better nutritive value, for example golden rice. So you can give an example also, golden rice. Then third is it will have a longer shelf life. So that is another important thing. So because it has a longer shelf life, its wastage will be reduced. So after the harvest till it is transported to the markets, given that the transportation issues are there in India, so the shelf life is going to reduce our food wastage and add further to our food security. Then increased resistance to droughts, increased resistance to floods and other disasters, then increased resistance to pests and insects. So all of these are important ways through which GM crops can help in the food security. So then we'll come to, no, it doesn't help. It is not a panacea for ensuring food security in India. The first thing is whenever genetically modified crops are being developed, they are going to have an impact on human health also. Why? Because some antibiotic resistance markers may be transferred to the human beings through with the help of these GM crops. So in that case, and when we talk of food security, it is food security also includes food safety. So just access to poisonous food is not food security. So the food security means that you have access to safe food at all times. So food safety is an integral part of food security. So when antibiotic resistance markers are transferred from these crops to the humans, it is going to have a huge impact on the health of the humans, that they might develop some antibiotic resistance, which definitely is not a part of food security. So that you can write, antibiotic resistance markers may be transferred. Second thing is even the first BT crop in India, or the BT cotton, was by Monsanto. Similarly, there is another company, Myco. So if you look at the companies which are manufacturing these GM crops, they are usually the Western companies. So it will lead to a domination of the world food production by just a few companies, and it will increase our dependence on these developed countries and their companies. So such huge dependence on few companies, that too from the developed countries, is again not an important component of food security. Food security can be provided at all times only when there is some amount of self-sufficiency, but too much dependent on few companies, they can do anything tomorrow. So that is definitely not a part of food security. So there also you can tell that the dependence on few companies is not good for the food security in a longer term. So that is the second issue. The third issue is that as of now there is no foolproof study regarding the GM crops and what their health and environmental impacts are going to be. So a lot amount of scientific research and publication is yet to be done, and in this context, it becomes very important that we postpone, at least if not suspend, but we postpone using GM crops to ensure food security to the future, when all these gaps are filled and there is enough research regarding the safety of the GM crops. So till that we have to postpone this. Then the next issue is, these GM crops are also set to reduce the species diversity. So how come? Because if there is an insect resistant plant, so the plant is insect resistant, but it might end up harming those insects which are not even its intended targets. So thereby it is going to reduce the species diversity. Sometimes these plants might end up harming the pollinators themselves, in which case the pollinators will not be able to pollinate, and this can in fact rather harm the food security in India. So you know how pollinators are important in fertilization and the production of the further generations in the case of plants. So that again will not happen because of the insect resistant plants harming the unintended targets. So that is another fifth issue. The sixth issue is that these crops may start developing resistance. So due to natural selection, the weeds, if for instance, if any crop is resistant to some of the weeds, then it means that if the plants are resistant to pests, then this trait may pass on to the weeds also. Then the weeds also become resistant to pests. Then they will also start growing and competing for resources with a main plant. So through natural selection, it might lead to development of what is called as super weeds. So then there will be no way how you can treat the super weeds, and these weeds will definitely pose a threat to the food security again. So this is another issue with respect to how GM crops can rather affect our food security badly. The seventh issue is that even if you look at the various yields produced by the GM crops, they have not been very promising results. So higher yields in mustard. So India also has a mustard variant which is now not yet approved for field trials. So, for instance, the higher yields in the mustard are from 5 countries which don't grow GM mustard. So, for instance, it is Germany, UK, France. So, these are all the countries which are one of the largest producers of the mustard seeds, but they are not growing GM mustard. So that is one thing important, that even without using the GM, these are the largest producers of GM mustard. So just by using GM crops itself will not guarantee huge yields, and it will not ensure food security. So these are the reasons you can give, and in the conclusion you can write some committees name. For instance, even the committee that was formed for doubling of the farmer income, that is Ashok Dalwai committee. It also said that the GM technology is definitely a good technology, but there are still several gaps which are to be filled, whether it is a regulatory gap or the gaps in the scientific research itself. These will have to be filled first, and only then we can move on with the GM technology. For now, it is better that we adopt a cautious approach when it comes to the GM technology. And there was even a parliamentary standing committee which looked into this issue of GM crops. Even that recommended that the GM crops, we need to adopt a cautious approach. First, we need to fill all the regulatory gaps in India, and only then we have to start experimenting with the GM crops. And even there has to be mandatory labeling of the products that are made from GM crops. So this is not there in many countries. So this will lead to cross country again, the contamination with the non-GM crops also. So mandatory labeling should be there. Then unchecked import of GM products should stop. We must also encourage organic farming along with this. So these were the recommendations of the Parliamentary Standing Committee. So with all these, by mentioning all these way forward, you can end your answer. So today's question is, what are the issues facing the higher educational institutions in India? This is a 10-mark question for 150 words. So and many of you I know are writing the answers on the website, but I've been little busy these days, so I've not been able to see it. Let me see if I can take out my time and see those answers. So keep writing and keep revising. Thank you.